The piercing sound of tires screeching against asphalt ripped through the quiet suburban morning. A woman in a bright pink power suit, clipboard in one hand and a cup of steaming black coffee in the other, stumped across a perfectly manicured lawn. Her face twisted in outrage as she stared at the horror before her. A large red fire truck parked right in the middle of a pristine driveway. To most people, it was just a firefighter's vehicle, but to Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, it was an unforgivable crime against neighborhood aesthetics. She marched up to the door and pounded on it with the force of a battering ram. Inside, Jake Miller, an exhausted firefighter fresh off a brutal 48-hour shift, groaned as he peeled his face off the couch cushion. His golden retriever, Sparky, wagged his tail and yawned beside him, clearly uninterested in the ruckus outside. Jake rubbed his eyes and checked the time, 7:02 a.m. Who in their right mind was knocking like the house was on fire at this hour? He swung the door open, still half asleep, and was met with Karen's furious glare. She shoved the clipboard toward him as if she were presenting an arrest warrant. "You're in violation," she announced, her voice filled with the kind of authority that only existed in her own mind. "This neighborhood has strict rules against commercial vehicles being parked in driveways." She jabbed a perfectly manicured finger toward the truck. "And that is a commercial vehicle." Jake blinked, still groggy. "It's not commercial. It's my personal truck. I'm a firefighter, you know. Emergency services? Saving lives." Karen's lips pursed so tightly they could have turned coal into diamonds. "I don't care if you're saving kittens from burning trees. The rules apply to everyone. That's a $500 fine." Jake let out a disbelieving laugh. "You're joking." Karen didn't even flinch. "Do I look like I'm joking?" At that moment, Sparky trotted up, grabbed the fine from Jake's hand, and promptly shredded it between his teeth before proudly spitting out the remains onto Karen's pristine white sneakers. For the first time in her HOA career, Karen was speechless. Her eyes twitched as she looked down at the slobbery paper bits now decorating her footwear. Then, without missing a beat, she gasped in horror. "Destruction of HOA property. That's another fine." Jake ran a hand down his face. This was not how he had planned on spending his morning. He had barely slept. His muscles ached from hauling people out of a burning apartment complex, and now he was being ticketed by the local neighborhood dictator. "Look, Karen," he sighed, trying to reason with her. "This is ridiculous. I'm not some random guy parking a food truck in my driveway. I live here. I work for this city. And that truck? It's the reason people are alive today." Karen's expression didn't waver. If anything, she looked even more determined. "Rules are rules. If I let you break them, the next thing you know, someone's putting up neon signs, and then we have a theme park on our hands." Jake, patience already worn thin, snapped. "A theme park? Seriously? I'm parking my truck in my own driveway, not building a roller coaster in the front yard." The door of a nearby house creaked open, and Mr. Thompson, a retired lawyer and longtime resident, stepped onto his porch, sipping his coffee with a knowing smirk. "Morning, Jake," he called out. "I see you've met the HOA's favorite menace." Karen whipped around. "I am simply enforcing community standards, Thompson." Mr. Thompson chuckled. "Right. Like when you fine Mrs. Peterson for having aggressively festive Christmas lights. That display was blinding." Karen shot back. "I nearly crashed my car." Jake pinched the bridge of his nose. "So what am I supposed to do? Park my truck 2 streets over? What happens if there's an emergency and I need to get to the station fast?" Karen crossed her arms. "That's not my problem. Pay the fine or have it towed. Your choice." Jake took a deep breath. He could feel his blood pressure rising, and the last thing he needed was to lose his cool over this nonsense. "Karen, you can't just tow an emergency responder's vehicle." Karen smirked. "Watch me." Sparky let out a low growl, sensing the tension. Karen narrowed her eyes at the dog, but took a cautious step back. "And keep your mud under control," she huffed. Jake exhaled slowly, trying to suppress the urge to argue further. He knew Karen wouldn't back down. The woman thrived on control, and giving in wasn't an option. Just then, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a message from the fire station. "House fire on Elm Street. All available units report immediately." His heart rate spiked. Instinct took over as he turned on his heel and sprinted toward his truck. But before he could reach the door, Karen made her boldest move yet. She stepped directly in front of the vehicle, blocking his path. "You're not going anywhere until this is resolved." Jake froze. He stared at her, completely dumbfounded. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely. You break the rules, you deal with the consequences. His fingers tightened around his keys. He was out of patience, out of time, and dangerously close to losing his temper. That's when the distant sound of sirens filled the air. At first, Karen's smirk remained in place, but as the noise grew louder and louder, something shifted in her expression. It wasn't just one siren, it was several. Then, like a scene straight out of an action movie, a convoy of massive fire trucks roared into the neighborhood, their red lights flashing like a warning beacon. Jake let out a small, knowing chuckle. Looks like my backup's here. Karen turned as the towering vehicles pulled up one after another, lining the street like a fleet of angry titans. The fire chief, a grizzled man with salt and pepper hair and the kind of presence that demanded respect, stepped out of the lead truck. He took one look at the situation, observing his firefighter blocked from leaving by a middle-aged woman in a pink suit, and sighed heavily. "Jake," he called out, "why the hell aren't you on the way to the fire?" Jake gestured toward Karen. "Ask her." All eyes turned to Karen, who suddenly looked far less confident than before. The fire chief crossed his arms. "Lady, unless you've got a burning building hidden behind your clipboard, I suggest you move." Karen's lips parted as if she were about to argue, but for once in her life, no words came out. The neighbors began gathering, whispering among themselves, some smirking at the spectacle unfolding before them. Mr. Thompson chuckled into his coffee. "Well, this just got interesting." Karen's face turned an impressive shade of red. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally, reluctantly, stepped aside. Jake wasted no time. He jumped into his truck, fired up the engine, and pulled out, leaving Karen standing in stunned silence as the massive fire trucks followed him down the street. As he sped toward the emergency, he couldn't help but smile. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The moment Jake's truck disappeared around the corner, Karen stood frozen on the pavement, her face still flushed with a mix of embarrassment and fury. The neighbors were still watching, whispering among themselves, some barely concealing their smirks. She had always considered herself the enforcer of the neighborhood, the protector of order and discipline. But now, in the wake of a full-blown fire station showdown, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: humiliation. But Karen wasn't one to back down. As the last fire truck followed Jake out of the neighborhood, she straightened her blazer, cleared her throat, and turned to the gathered residents. "This is not over," she announced, her voice regaining its usual self-righteous edge. "That man blatantly disrespected HOA regulations, and I will not allow this kind of behavior to go unpunished." Mr. Thompson, still sipping his coffee on his porch, raised an amused eyebrow. "So, what's the plan, Karen? Are you going to find the entire fire department now?" Karen's lips thinned into a tight line. She wasn't about to admit defeat, especially not in front of these people. She stormed back toward her house, slamming the door behind her, already pulling out her phone to call the HOA board. Meanwhile, at the fire station, Jake barely had time to park before leaping into action. The fire on Elm Street was still raging, smoke visible from miles away. Within minutes, he was suited up, helmet strapped on, and racing toward the burning structure alongside his team. The adrenaline coursing through his veins momentarily pushed aside the absurdity of what had just happened with Karen. The fire was intense, but nothing Jake and his crew hadn't faced before. They worked like a well-oiled machine, dousing flames, rescuing 2 trapped residents, and ensuring no further damage spread to neighboring houses. It took over an hour before the last ember was extinguished, and by the time they were packing up their equipment, the exhaustion was hitting him hard. As Jake stood by the fire truck, catching his breath and wiping soot from his forehead, the fire chief walked over, shaking his head. "You want to tell me why I had to send a whole damn convoy to your neighborhood this morning?" Jake sighed. "Long story. I got time." Jake chuckled dryly. "HOA lady tried to fine me for parking my truck in my own driveway. Blocked me from leaving when the call came in." The fire chief stared at him for a moment before letting out a deep, exasperated sigh. "You've got to be kidding me. I wish." The chief muttered something under his breath before shaking his head. "You need me to handle this? I can make a call. Raise some hell." Jake smirked. "Tempting, but I think she's digging her own grave. She's already pissed off half the neighborhood. I just need to be ready for whatever she tries next." The chief clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Well, if she wants to fight, she's going to learn real fast that messing with firefighters is a bad idea." By the time Jake returned home that evening, he was dead on his feet. He had barely stepped out of his truck when he spotted a familiar figure standing at the edge of his property, arms crossed, an all-too-smug expression plastered across her face. Karen, Jake sighed and ran a hand through his hair. You've got to be kidding me. I warned you, Karen said, stepping forward. Since you refused to comply with the fine, I had no choice but to escalate the matter. Jake frowned. Escalate. Karen's grin widened. Oh, you'll find out soon enough. At that moment, a tow truck turned onto the street, its flashing lights illuminating the growing crowd of neighbors who had once again gathered to watch the unfolding drama. Jake's exhaustion vanished instantly, replaced by sheer disbelief. No way. You did not just call a tow truck for my... Karen held up a hand. It's out of my hands now. HOA regulations state that any commercial vehicle violating parking guidelines can and will be towed at the homeowner's expense. Jake took a deep breath, willing himself to stay calm. Karen, for the last time, my truck is not a commercial vehicle. I don't use it to sell anything. It's not a business truck. It's a damn emergency responder vehicle. The tow truck driver hesitated, looking between Karen and Jake. Is this actually a commercial vehicle? 'Cause I really don't want to tow a firefighter's truck, lady. Karen's jaw tightened. It's unauthorized. That's all that matters. Jake could hear the murmurs of disapproval from the neighbors, some even recording the scene on their phones. He clenched his fists at his sides, trying to decide how to handle this. Then, as if on cue, the sound of sirens filled the air again. Karen's eyes widened slightly as a familiar convoy of fire trucks rolled into the neighborhood, lights flashing, but sirens deliberately kept low. The fire chief himself stepped out first, looking utterly unimpressed as he took in the ridiculous scene before him. The tow truck driver visibly paled. Oh hell no, I'm not getting involved in this. Jake crossed his arms, smirking. You were saying, Karen? Karen, for the first time, seemed to falter. This is an internal HOA matter. You can't just barge in here. The fire chief let out a slow breath before stepping forward, his boots crunching against the pavement. Lady, do you have any idea what you're doing right now? Karen squared her shoulders. Yes, actually. I'm enforcing the rules. The chief glanced at Jake, then back at Karen. You're interfering with emergency personnel. That is a very serious affair. Karen scoffed. Oh, please. It's not like he's responding to a fire right now. The fire chief gave a humorless laugh. That's not how this works. This truck is part of emergency response. Blocking it, fining it, trying to have it towed, you are actively interfering with a first responder's ability to do his job. That's illegal. The tow truck driver, now looking like he wanted to be anywhere but here, raised his hands in surrender. Yeah, I'm not touching this. I don't get paid enough to tow a firefighter's truck. I'm out. Without another word, he hopped back into his truck, turned it around, and sped off, leaving Karen standing alone in the middle of the street. The neighbors erupted into quiet applause, some even whistling. Mr. Thompson gave an approving nod. Now that's entertainment. Karen, clearly flustered, tried to regain control. This isn't over. I'll take this up with the HOA board. The fire chief smirked. You do that, and while you're at it, maybe look up the laws on obstructing emergency personnel. Because if you try this again, I guarantee you won't like how it ends. Jake, now thoroughly enjoying himself, leaned against his truck. You hear that, Karen? Maybe you should start fining yourself. Karen sputtered for a response, but no words came out. With an angry huff, she turned on her heel and stormed back to her house, slamming the door behind her. Jake exhaled, shaking his head. Unbelievable. The fire chief clapped him on the back. Get some rest, kid. Something tells me this fight isn't over yet. Jake watched as the fire trucks slowly pulled away, knowing full well that Karen was inside her house, already plotting her next move. The neighborhood was alive with chatter long after the fire trucks had left. Neighbors gathered in clusters, some laughing, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Karen had always been a pain, but this time she had truly outdone herself. Trying to tow a firefighter's truck, blocking an emergency responder from doing his job, it was the kind of thing that spread like wildfire in a community like this. Inside her house, Karen paced furiously, her phone clutched in her hand as she waited for someone from the HOA board to pick up. She had called 3 times already, and each call had gone straight to voicemail. This was unacceptable. She was the one keeping this neighborhood in order, making sure everything ran smoothly. She was the reason property values remained high, the reason everything looked pristine. And now she was being treated like some kind of villain. Finally, the call connected. A groggy voice answered, clearly annoyed. Karen? It's almost 10 at night. What do you want? Karen straightened her posture, as if the board member could see her. Mark, I need to file an official complaint against one of our residents. He has been openly defying HOA rules, bringing emergency vehicles that disrupt the peace, and encouraging hostility against our regulations." There was a long silence on the other end, then a tired sigh. "You mean the firefighter?" "Yes," Karen snapped. "And I want the board to back me up on this. We need to set an example. If we let this slide, people will start thinking they can park whatever they want, wherever they want. We'll have RVs, food trucks, who knows what else." Mark sighed again, but this time it had a different edge to it. "Karen, do you have any idea how bad this looks?" Karen blinked. "Bad? What are you talking about?" "The entire neighborhood is talking about this," Mark said, his voice growing sharper. "We've been getting emails, phone calls. People are furious, Karen. They think you've gone too far." Karen scoffed. "Oh, please. The HOA is here to enforce rules, not win popularity contests." "Well, maybe you should have thought about that before you tried to have a firefighter's truck towed," Mark shot back. "Do you even realize how bad the optics are on this? You're not cracking down on an unkempt lawn or a tacky mailbox. You're harassing a first responder. Do you know how many people in this neighborhood have family members who are police officers, EMTs, firefighters? You just picked a fight with the wrong person." Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Mark didn't stop. "And guess what? The HOA board had an emergency meeting without you tonight. You're being removed as HOA enforcer, effective immediately." Karen's stomach dropped. "You can't do that." "Yes, we can. And we just did. It was unanimous. Even the board members who usually agree with you are fed up. You've embarrassed the HOA, Karen. You've turned us into a joke. And frankly, we're tired of cleaning up your messes." Karen gripped the phone tighter. "I have done nothing but protect this community from chaos. I am the only one taking these rules seriously." "No, Karen," Mark said tiredly. "You're the only one who thinks this neighborhood needs a dictator." The call ended. Karen stood there in stunned silence. The phone still pressed to her ear even though the line was dead. She couldn't believe it. She had dedicated years to keeping this neighborhood in check, and now, just like that, they were turning on her. The next morning, Karen awoke to a sight she had never seen before: peace. The neighborhood was quiet, but not in the usual oppressive way she enforced. It was a relaxed quiet. No one was rushing to move their trash cans in under a strict 3-minute window. No one was anxiously pulling weeds from their yards to avoid a fine. People were outside, talking, laughing, enjoying their lives without her constant presence looming over them. And then she saw it. A massive sign had been placed in front of her house. In big, bold letters, it read, "Neighborhood Barbecue, celebrating the end of HOA tyranny. Free food. Everyone welcome." Karen's hands clenched into fists. She stormed outside, ready to rip the sign down. But before she could, she spotted something even worse. Jake, the firefighter, was standing on his driveway, a smug grin on his face as he loaded up a cooler into his truck. The golden retriever, Sparky, sat beside him, wagging his tail happily. Jake looked up, saw Karen, and waved. "Morning, Karen. Hope to see you at the barbecue." Karen felt her blood pressure skyrocket. "You think this is funny?" Jake shrugged. "I think it's hilarious." She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. "Enjoy your little celebration while you can. I'm going to fight this. The HOA needs structure," and Jake cut her off. "The HOA doesn't need you. And guess what? No one wants you in charge anymore. It's over, Karen." Karen stared at him, seething, but deep down, she knew he was right. As the day went on, the neighborhood came alive in a way it never had before. The barbecue was in full swing, with music playing, kids running around, and people actually enjoying themselves. Jake and his fire station crew were the guests of honor, with neighbors lining up to shake their hands and thank them for their service. Karen, meanwhile, stood at her window, watching. For the first time, she saw the truth. She had spent so much time trying to control everything, so much time making sure the rules were followed to perfection, that she had completely forgotten what a neighborhood was supposed to feel like. It wasn't about keeping lawns at a precise height or ensuring everyone painted their mailbox the same shade of beige. It was about community, about people looking out for one another. And now, the neighborhood had that without her. Karen turned away from the window, her face hardening. Maybe she had lost this battle. Maybe the HOA had cast her aside. But this wasn't over. Not yet. As she retreated into her house, plotting her next move, the sound of laughter and music filled the air outside. And for the first time in years, the neighborhood finally felt like home.